Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to my channel. My name is Jasmina from Jasmina Brozovic Astrology. And today I have a special guest, one of my friends, astrologers, Jamie Yang. She's a practicing astrologer, helping people with psychology as well and astrology. And she's brilliant in what she does. And today she's going to talk about boundaries in astrology. In what sense? How can we help the people pleasing people, and how to find how to say no in a healthy way with astrology? So welcome, Jamie. How are you?
I'm doing well, Jasmina. Thank you for having me.
Oh no, it's beautiful. We had a great chat with Matt. We were together in his psychology and astrology
Yeah.
chat. So that's how I actually came to talk to you, to listen to you more deeply. And I'm happy that we connected now, and you can actually tell us more about your work. Please, first, before we start digging deeper, please introduce yourselves. Where you're coming from? What is your astrology background? Where can people find you and everything, please?
Yes, absolutely. So I'm Jamie Scorpio AF astrologer, and I was really intentional in my name because I learned through numerology that although the pricings, the titles that I gave were broken down to something that were like unfavorable for me. So I just really wanted to be intentional. I have a stellium in Scorpio, which for those of you who don't know, a stellium is when you have three or more planets in a single sign or house, and that energy, that area of your life becomes really dominant. Scorpio rules astrology, psychology, going down the rabbit hole. I also have a strong eighth house, which is also related to those things as well. And I just have a long history of my clients being psychologists, psychotherapists, and things of that nature. My background in astrology is heavily psychological, but it's a combination of ancient and modern astrology. And I really like that blend because we live in a modern world. So I believe that the modern planets, the modern concepts in astrology are really important because they're relevant to the world that we live in. But I also think that understanding the roots and the origin stories for why modern astrology is what it is really valuable, because I think that there are things that some of the information that's been kind of twisted or tangled around, there's some misinformation, and some of the stuff in ancient astrology is outdated, but some of it I think can just blend so beautifully with modern astrology. So I have a
Perfect.
combination of that.
Perfect. I completely agree. Oh, dogs. We hear dogs again. Anyway, I was gonna say it's since psychology is such a modern science, let's say a branch of science, and just because Pluto and Scorpio, as you mentioned in the eighth house, it's all connected with that. And it's not coincidence that Pluto was discovered when psychology became popular as well. So I know digging deep is no stranger. No, it's not a strange thing for you. So
Not at
um,
all.
yeah, please. So tell me why this topic. What is so passionate about? Why do you want to talk about this?
So before I became an astrologer, I was a mindset coach. And one of the big things is I created this course called You're a Badass Energy Bitch. And it was designed specifically for empaths, highly sensitive people, because I noticed that a lot of people who were struggling with boundaries had this belief of like, I have to protect my energy. And it was very much this reactionary thing. And it came from a place of defensiveness, which I didn't think was really healthy. And it wasn't the only way to live your life. And so this is sort of an adaptation, the astrological version of it, really blending astrology. And I started looking at patterns of people who struggle with boundaries, people pleasing, and stuff. There are things that are related to Pisces, which dissolves boundaries, the co-rulers, Jupiter and Neptune, but also taking a look at Saturn, which is about boundaries, to really support you in helping with that. And right now more than ever, with Saturn transiting in Pisces and with the lunar points in Aries and Libra, I just feel like this is such a revolutionary time for people pleasers to really learn to develop boundaries. Like, I think this is the best time ever. And there's just so much opportunities here. And something that I've noticed just within the course that I created as a mindset coach, and then especially now layering on astrology, I feel like there's a lot of well-intentioned recommendations on how to practice boundaries, but I don't think it's really sustainable in execution, which is why so many people struggle. Because what usually ends up happening is even the experts will say, okay, you want to create a dialogue to create boundaries. And when you do that, you're operating from the energy of Virgo and Mercury, which makes sense because Virgo and Mercury being opposite of Pisces is very much about creating boundaries and stuff because it's the opposite of Pisces. But when you are looking at someone who's struggling with boundaries from a space of Pisces and they're represented by a fish that can't speak, talking doesn't come to them naturally. Virgo is on the opposite end of the spectrum. So expecting a water sign.
Sorry, so I was just gonna stop you for a little bit. So do you feel that people who have a lot of Pisces placements or strong Piscean energy or sun, moon, ascendant in Pisces or the 12th house, which is also the Pisces house, lots of planets there, do you feel that they struggle more with boundaries than the others?
I would say yes. It does depend. My sun is in Pisces and I have a really good sun and the co-rulers are really good for me. So I don't necessarily struggle with it. But I think that absolutely, because Pisces is the sign that dissolves boundaries and stuff. So that's definitely a pattern. I would say also people that have like strong Libra and Venus as well. Venus is a really permissive sign. Libra is about considering the other person. So I think these are areas where I've seen it most common, like when people have boundary issues, those are the signs that kind of pop up the most, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially, yeah. Or if you have a lot of strong Libra or Pisces signature, which means lots of planets or stuff like that. Okay, so how can then Saturn being in Pisces, which is like oxymoron, is totally opposite. Like, how can this help us now to find a better way to set boundaries for ourselves?
Saturn is about structures, systems, boundaries. It's about correcting things. It represents success. So I think this is a time where it's easier for people to work hard, to be more disciplined and stuff, because Pisces is it's a very permissive sign and, it's more passive and stuff. So Pisces can really help, Saturn can help Pisces really persevere in looking at how can I successfully, strategically, sustainably create boundaries in a way that's going to help me, because Saturn also rules boundaries as well. So it creates that sense of protection.
Yeah, that's very good. So how would you make a correlation between the 12th house then and people who maybe have strong 12th house placements?
I would say I know someone who has maybe 4 planets in their 12th house as a Sag rising with Scorpio. So there's a lot of trauma, and I believe her sun, Mercury, Venus, and Jupiter is in there or something like that. So it's a lot of even having Jupiter there, which is the traditional ruler of Pisces being there. If Mercury is there, maybe expressing boundaries can be something that's difficult. It does depend on also the sign that's there as well, the elements, any planets that are there. But it definitely, since the 12th house rules subconscious, unconscious mind, or chronic fears, there could be a fear of speaking up, and there could be subconscious, unconscious things. If you include karmic astrology, it could also be fears from previous incarnations that we carried over as well. So there's a lot there.
Absolutely, I agree. Yeah, 12th house is a mystery house for me anyway. So it's always dipping into the unknown, into the something that you cannot explain logically, right? I'm a strong Gemini, so 12th house is always something that's mysteriously, intriguing me.
You're beyond so much to learn.
Yeah, because it's beyond beyond what my brain can comprehend in a way that has logic, right? So excellent. So how is that correlating with the because we always look at the opposite axis. So what is this correlation with the 6th house, which is about health as well?
Yeah, so the 6th house is about problems, health, how you manage your health. And because it's the opposite, it's of Pisces, it's got the opposite qualities of Virgo, regardless of the signs that you have here. And that's why Virgo has great boundaries and stuff. And it's ruled by Mercury. It's about communicating. So it's a useful house, don't get me wrong, in practicing boundaries. But I think where a lot of people get tripped up is that when you're going from, okay, I have a hard time practicing boundaries in the 12th house to, oh, use these Virgo mercurial tools, creating boundaries, talking, you're opposing. It's like, it's literally, it's harder. And Pisces isn't a fire sign. They don't thrive on challenges, you know? And so trying something that's a little bit more passive, more gentle, something that allows you to flow into things naturally works a little bit better. So I think that there's a lot of well-intentioned, because if you look at like any self-help books or even what a lot of therapists say, and they're like, okay, well, what are you going to say? What are you going to dialogue? It's like you're literally putting someone in a position that's like the most challenging and difficult for them. And I just think it's a little premature. So I like taking a different approach.
Okay, tell me more about it.
So the first thing I look at is I look at someone's rising sign. Like, you know, your first house tells me the best way for you to navigate your life. What element do you have here? You know, if you're a water sign, like, you know, kind of pacing yourself. If you're a Cancer, you know, if it's Scorpio, processing traumas. Pisces, it could be through retreating and creativity. If you're a fire sign, it may be a little bit easier, you know, to take the initiative. If you're an earth sign, doing things that are practical and sustainable, particularly if you're a Taurus, looking at your core values, which is something that I do also mention as that's also a part of it, but looking at the best way for you to navigate your life, like that's the first thing. And then I look at the second house. It sits right below your first house. It's things that support you and your physical body. What sign do you have here? Any planets? You know, I don't want to get too complicated, but looking at like what can support you. And I also like to look at the fourth house because this is your emotional, your foundational needs. And so understanding that, because if someone isn't, what I find really interesting is that the remedy that's often and the approach that's often recommended for people who have struggles with boundaries, and it's very Pisces or even like Libra, which is an air sign. These are ungrounded signs and stuff. Is that like when you're talking, you're trying to change your mindset, that's all the way up here. But when you want to be grounded so that you feel comfortable really creating that boundary is ruled by Saturn. It's an earth sign. It's rooted. So looking at your fourth house to be like, okay, what can you do to make yourself feel safe? I think is really important. And something I want to mention is that I see so many people say you have to get grounded. And I don't always agree that that's the best approach right off the bat.
Okay.
If someone is experiencing traumas and asking them to ground into that, like if that's all they're experiencing, that could be re-traumatizing. So like for me, I have Libra in my fourth house of home. So grounding is one of the ways. But for me, what like grounding is ultimately supposed to help us to feel safe. Not everyone feels safe by necessarily physically getting connected, you know? And so for me, like aerial yoga is like, I'm off the ground, I'm hanging on this thread and, you know, I've got this like soft fabric, like my feet is being hung and I just feel amazing. Someone who has Cancer here might do well with float therapy. Aries might do great with exercise. You know, it's all of these different things. Leo might be creativity. So looking at like, what are your emotional needs? Because when you feel emotionally safe, it's going to be more sustainable in order to create these boundaries. So I feel like these are the things that should be fortified first, because these are the houses that come before the sixth house. So working on these things. So I know I skipped over from like the first, the second to the fourth, and then I personally go back to the third house because that's mindset, that's thinking, and stuff. And I do that because sometimes people are so busy swirling up here that I feel like kind of grounding themselves in the fourth house makes it a little bit more empowering to go back to the third house. Because I think looking at your mindset, like what you say, practicing scripting, learning to get comfortable expressing the boundaries in your own like space before introducing another person, I think is really important. But if people have a mindset and a script that's not empowering, they can kind of perpetuate that. So I have sort of like this process.
That's a good point. It's not only about setting boundaries with other people and environment. It's with yourself as well. You know, I'm not going to eat another piece of cake, or, you know, saying no to myself, like, no, I'm not going to do this or whatever it is. So that's a good point, because people always start with, you know, how to say no to others or how to do this. But then you have to start with yourself first, right? As everything else.
Yeah.
And then it's going to reflect in your outside world as well. That's a good point. I like that.
Absolutely. And that's something that like they call it scripting, where they say that you should practice saying it like yourself. Otherwise, you're just going to go with what you're normally going to do. And that the cake analogy is a really popular one that a lot of experts use, where like when people are like, oh, like, do you want a piece of cake? If you don't practice what you're going to say, the reaction is going to be sure.
Yeah.
So,
I also noticed that people avoid things that they feel they're going to be tempting to them, which is also not a good practice, right? You need to kind of face
that's the
yourself,
bypassing.
right? Yeah, that's, you have to kind of, it's also one of the, one of the ways of not setting boundaries for yourselves. If you just go away or, escape from the problem, right? So you need to kind of put yourself in a situation and practice. Yeah, I like that. So what would be, I know Piscean and more watery people have different type of issues with saying no versus Libra and relating. But in general, what do you feel that which transits or what type of astrological surrounding situation can help them, to say, stop, this is enough, or, what do
You
you
know,
feel?
it really does depend. I think Saturn is a big thing. And I really like Saturn because it stays in a sign for 2.5 years. So
Mhm.
regardless of what you're struggling with, what house that it's in, you can always use that energy. So I really like that. It's really corrective, it's grounding and stuff. I also really like the sun as well because
Mm.
it goes through each sign every month and stuff. So it's like, your fifth house is it's home to Leo, which rules the fifth house of your self-expression. It's what you enjoy, your values. It's using your natural talents. It's your life force energy. It's the most independent sign. So using that, I think, is a great way to express yourself.
That's
And
interesting.
the way that you practice your boundaries can change from each sign that it's in. It works better with like if give me a sign.
Sagittarius.
Sagittarius. So if your sun is in Sagittarius, it may be that the way you express yourself could be from a place of optimism, like correlating it with your personal goals, seeing things from a higher perspective, and looking at it from that perspective. Whereas like if the sun is in I don't know, like
Capricorn. It's called
Capricorn.
Capricorn because it's just after Sag, so it's kind of correction
Yeah.
of Sag.
Looking at like successful leaders, maybe looking at parents or authority figures or someone who has really good boundaries, maybe looking at like traditional leaders, or maybe looking at like the benefit of how can practicing boundaries help you as a leader, help you to be successful? How can you automate things, which actually brings me to another point when you were mentioning, like, it's great to learn to practice boundaries like within yourself before you talk about it with other people. Sometimes the approach that's best to help people with boundaries could be different. Like some people, it may be to, like, if they have like strong 11th house influence, maybe creating like a message on social media, to make an announcement. And then, if someone breaches your boundary through a text message, you can be like, hey, this is something that I discussed, and send a link into that social media post. Some people, it's better one-on-one. Sometimes it's on writing. Sometimes it's a group situation. It's like what is the best environment that's going to facilitate your desired result? What approach are you going to take? So that's a big thing too.
Yeah, and I noticed that each moon sign has different. Like moon signs are actually our emotional needs and how we feel secure and safe. So, just um, paying attention and feeding your moon, as Anne Orthley would say, I think it's also very important to kind of, if you feed your moon and your moon is happy, you're gonna be able to set boundaries better, I feel, because if you're not emotionally happy, if your moon is unhappy, then nothing is going to work.
And that's such a good point. That's the reason why I focus a lot on the fourth house, but the fourth house is home to Cancer. So it's the same thing essentially.
Yeah, yeah.
Is that like a lot of people who struggle with boundaries they normalize not feeling comfortable. So really connecting with your moon, and even also like your Venus and your Taurus, like the two signs and planets that represent comfort, really looking at like, what can I do to feel comfortable? What does comfort look like for me? And, it's sort of like once you develop that standard, you're like, oh, I'm not putting up with that trash like energy anymore. It's like you have to kind of like really look at what is comfortable for you. What is your baseline? Make that a priority. And I think that's a huge thing with, that's Cancer, that's your emotions, that's your physical body. What do you need emotionally to feel safe? What feels comfortable for you physically? How does that feel like? When do you deviate from that? Really understanding that, I think, is really important.
So yeah, so to go on the other side of people pleasers, I know that the people pleasing comes from wanting to be loved and appreciated and just be accepted. So how do you feel? Because sometimes it's people, a lot of people pleasers are actually very unhappy. They want to be, so from your experience, what can you tell about that?
I feel like a lot of it, like you said, comes from wanting to be wanting to please, wanting to be accepted, wanting to be loved. And so they're unhappy, but I think that it feels sad to say this, but I feel like they kind of normalize feeling sad. So it's there, but it's almost like it's background noise and they don't realize that they're sad, and I think that's where what you mentioned about the moon is so important and also like me bringing up Venus, is learning to understand what feels good for you, what happiness is for you, what comfort is for you, so that you can have that baseline. But I think that also goes into when we talk about the moon, like for like family, like a lot of these people pleasing tendency tends to be things that we learned from our family. And there was something that I read where it was like every people pleaser comes from, and it was some family thing where it's like because you learn that usually, like, I'm not, in the world of billions of people, I'm sure there are people pleasers that like cropped up in adulthood, but usually it starts in families.
I remember from my childhood that they used to tell me, oh, be a good girl, don't fight, so it comes from that, just keeping the
Yeah.
false peace, as I say, being
False
being
peace,
good, and
yes.
yes, right. It's like, be good, don't fight with anybody, just I know people, I know parents, they have the best intentions, but I wouldn't give that advice to my kid today. Like,
Yeah.
it just doesn't make sense. So I know that
I
it's
agree.
always about balance. It's always about balance, and how far you can push without hurting anybody, but also protecting yourself. How far you can go being kind and empathetic about towards others and sacrifice yourself, but also not to hurt yourself as well. So there's always finding that balance. That's my number one question in my life, like how to find balance. Where's that line? Where's that line
Yeah.
that you to draw? So how do you feel that astrology can help people with finding that line, finding that balance?
I think a lot of what I mentioned of understanding like what your needs are, the best way for you to navigate your life. And also like even when it comes to like, our chart kind of gives like this insight on like the type of experiences we're primarily meant to have. And we're not limited to that, but like I have like a reading called like Your Cosmic Support, where I help people identify like where your support system is. So when you take a look at like Mercury, for example, right? Because when it comes to these types of interactions, it's Virgo, it's Mercury, it's sixth house, it's problems, it's boundary matters, and so sometimes I feel like people struggle with like boundary issues and they have all these problems because they're focusing on things that they really not, I don't want to say that they're not supposed to focus on, but it's like maybe they need to focus on it this much and they're giving it this much attention. So I look at someone's chart and I'm like, okay, well, you don't actually, like, you're not here to focus on these many things, but you are. And that's why like there's like these issues that are happening. And oftentimes it's like, I feel like these problems happen so that you can separate from it. Because that's the energy of Virgo in sixth house, is that you create a boundary, you literally let go of what's like a problem that's not benefiting you. Like Virgo is very analytical, it's very discerning, and it's about getting rid of things that don't work. And that's not for everyone, but I do think that there's a huge part of that. There's a lot of like carrying the baggage.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I think knowing your own chart is number one way to heal.
Yeah.
So being open to understanding, many people have a tendency to say, oh, why is this happening to me again, cycles of life and stuff. So maybe just uh, understanding your chart and really can empower you, giving you
Yeah.
control back of your life, not, so the outside circumstances don't uh, necessarily need to rule your life. It's not that black and white, don't get me wrong. I know that,
Yeah.
there's many situations in life you can't, like, in, you even us as an astrologist, we go through tough times. It's not like we are
Yeah.
immune to just because you know something doesn't mean you're
We're
immune to it,
definitely
right?
not.
Right, so it's still, yeah, so we're also humans, right? But just having that awareness helps you go through life easier when the tough times comes, or just understanding yourself, okay, how I reacted that way again, the trigger, or somebody else, when somebody else's placements,
Yeah.
it's you have a better understanding. Yeah, that's very
Yeah.
good.
And
Yeah.
I also like to look at the eighth house to look at like what is the best way to process the trauma, because a lot of
Mhm.
people pleasers, they're empaths, and empaths and narcissists, they're still both trauma responses on opposite ends of the spectrum, which is like outside of, I'm not going to get into that because it's way too much to get
Yeah,
into.
yeah.
But it's like with the narcissist, it was like, well, we're not going to talk, that's a separate video. But like with empaths, it's about like, okay, they become hypersensitized to the environment, and they're like, okay, I want to know how everyone is feeling so that I can please everyone, so I'm going to be liked. And that's where the people pleasing comes from. So it's a trauma response. And I spent a lot of time, effort, and energy into attempting to process my traumas in a way that just wasn't working. And it was through astrology that I realized I wasn't using the best methods for me.
Ah,
So, like, my signature reading is Jamie Scorpio AF, where I help people analyze like the best way for them to process their traumas and stuff. And then I have a separate one for like, you're a badass energy bitch, for people who know, like, I specifically have people pleasing challenges. I want support in this. But a lot of it is that I feel like people get discouraged because so much of what goes on in the world is standardized as like, if you have this problem, go do this. And as
yeah,
astrologers, we know that shit doesn't work for everyone.
no,
It really doesn't, like
yeah.
what made me successful in so many ways are what most people like. It's like the path to failure. And that's my path to success. And once I learned astrology, I'm like, oh, that makes so much sense. So
Yeah,
looking at
you're right.
that.
Yeah, and knowing your path and purpose of kind of, or what your strengths are, because sometimes people feel they, nothing is good with me. Like there's a bunch of other stuff, so that's because that's not true, right? So all of us
Yeah.
have, all this stuff. So yes, I would encourage people to have a astrology reading, to know their own chart, to get
Mhm.
familiar with that. I think many. I'm not saying that the problems will go away. I'm not saying they're gonna have a easier way to set boundaries right away, but with time, absolutely, yes. I
It's
think, yeah.
Yeah, it's just, it provides us with tools on allowing us to make informed decisions on the best way to go about things. Because, like, I'll be honest, there are times I look at my chart and I'm like, ooh, I really shouldn't do this, but I'm gonna do it anyways. And I'm like, and these are some resources that could help me when like when I deal with the consequences and stuff. But yeah, there's so many amazing ways to look at it. And you had asked me like, which planets do I look at? But I also look at like natally which planet is best aspected. And I also go
Mhm.
off of that too. Because I mean, you can use any planet to work on these things. Mars is like, what's the best action, or what trauma do you have to heal? So we have, like, we talked about the sun, moon, Mercury, Venus, the things that you value. Something I find so interesting is I emphasize this to all of my clients. I've only had one client do this immediately, or I also teach astrology. So like even including my students, which is, it sounds boring, but I have a fun way of doing it, a fun, easy way, because I'm too impatient, is to get clear on what your core values are. Because core values are ruled by Taurus, the second house. It's the most uncompromising sign. And it's the fixed sign, the fixed earth sign. And so think about what viscerally pisses you off, things that make you livid. That's when your core values aren't being met. And
Ah,
creating that, like, I've read so many books and lost interest because I just thought core values sounded so boring. And then my friend was like, remember that time you popped off on someone? They're like, your core value wasn't met. And I was like, why is that not a thing? It's so brilliant.
Yeah, that's
So
interesting.
yeah, like Venus, looking at Venus, your core values. So sun, moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars taking action.
But don't
Jupiter with,
forget Neptune. Yeah, but don't forget Neptune, because Neptune is about, I think I
yeah,
feel that the aspects between Neptune and personal planets or angles can be very hard to set
yeah.
boundaries sometimes. Yeah.
Well, also, I think like the thing is that all of the planets and placements, the signs, the houses, they're going to manifest whether we intentionally do it or not. So when we are intentionally putting effort into it, I feel like it redirects that energy.
Mhm.
So using Neptune qualities of like music, ocean,
Oh
float
yeah.
therapy, I love recommending float therapy for people who have strong Neptune, particularly like people of like Neptune and Uranus on their ascendant and
Mhm.
stuff, and they're experiencing a lot of like traumas and they want to experience a reversal. Float therapy, I think that that's particularly because people who have like people pleasing challenges related to family and their mom and stuff, going back to the womb, and it's such a beautiful practice.
Yeah, yeah,
Creativity, using
yeah.
art, poetry.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Art therapy is also very not popular, but it's more getting more attention these days, which I think
Yeah.
it's very good. Yeah, I like that. Yeah, using the best, not to wobble in the bad traits of a sign or a planet, but to use the best of them. I think that's
Mhm.
that's a good way to do it. Absolutely. Sorry, I did interrupt you. You were going Jupiter, so I'll go back to Jupiter.
Oh, I think we actually covered Jupiter when I gave the Sagittarius analogy of like
Okay.
looking at higher education, personal goals, seeing the higher perspective of things. With Pluto, looking at things from a psychological perspective, looking at like your fears and stuff. With Uranus, maybe something with friends, doing reversals, revolutionizing things. And then, particularly with the generational planets, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, they're the higher octaves of the traditional planets. So, Mercury is the lower octave of Uranus. So, working with like, okay, what are some mindset stuff? What are some thoughts? What's some vocabulary? Some, what I'm saying, journaling, how can I revolutionize it? How can I make it better? Uranus could also be support groups as
Oh yeah.
well. Large groups of people, support groups, using astrology, doing things where it's like, how can I innovate? How can I revolutionize? Thinking about the higher, like thinking about like, okay, when particularly because Uranus rules the 11th house and it's about your collective goals, the legacy you want to leave behind. Think about how are you going to, how are these things going to be benefited by creating these boundaries?
Yes, I love that.
Yeah.
Yes, that's a good point. Wow, woohoo! Yeah. Oh, did we touch on Mars?
Mars, I would say, is like looking at what's the best action for you to take.
Get
And it's like really looking at like, like Mars, like since it rules Aries and Scorpio, but like which sign is going to be better to play with, Some people like they have or we all have trapped traumas in our bodies, but there's exercises we can do, trauma release exercises, different things.
I was just thinking,
Mhm.
can a Mars position in our charts help us in some way to say no or to set boundaries easier?
Absolutely, because since Mars is another independent planet from the sun, and it's the first planet that tried to separate. Like even though Mars is about initiating, it's also about separation. And before I learned the reason why, I kept being like, why is Mars separation? I thought Mars is initiating, and Scorpio, it rules Scorpio, and it's maintaining. It's like it's a fixed sign.
Mm.
But yeah, it's a way that you can like separate and be like, I don't want to deal with this. And particularly even if you have like a connection to Mars in your fourth house, whether you have Mars in your fourth house, the ruler of Mars, the ruler of your fourth house has a connection to your fourth house, the planet. That can be a way to separate because the fourth house can also be about separations and endings as well.
Ah, I like that. I like that. Yeah. So there's many ways of some people, as we know, have more issues. Some people have less issues. It depends on aspects and placements and bunch of this stuff. And yeah, you said lots of beautiful practical advice how to practice uh, setting boundaries. And I'm actually very happy that you mentioned that Saturn in Pisces that we are in the middle of now can collectively help us with that, which I think collectively we need. Um, so currently, what other aspects do you feel what's going to happen when when Saturn and Neptune go to Aries next year? How is that going to?
Oh man, I honestly I can feel like going one or two. Honestly, I feel like it's gonna be both. You know,
Yeah.
I think that there's gonna be like something I noticed is that I when I was younger, I used to have like friends that were people pleasers, and they were kind of envious at me being able to create boundaries. And so they almost got drunk with when they realized, oh, I can set boundaries, and they went so overboard, right? So I feel like
Mm,
I can see that potentially happening, and some people just going so intense because they're like, I spent all this time in Pisces learning to create boundaries, and then they're kind of being combative. And you know, when and I saw it a lot when like North Node went into Aries, and people were just
yeah.
picking fights, and I was just like, yo, and it was like, and the
Yeah.
funny thing is that like people didn't know that I was like anonymously posting things, and I knew who this person is, and I'm just like, I know your story, I know you struggle with people pleasing, so I know you're just like kind of, you know, like it's like people who aren't used to that power, they go a little bit like overboard with it.
Hmm.
So I think that there's going to be that, and then you know, Saturn, it's a malefic planet, you know, in like Aries. They're not really used to like playing with each other, you know, like I also think it depends on like everyone's chart. Like I have a really good friend who's a Scorpio rising, and he natally has Saturn and Aries, you know, so he's had his whole life learning to like discipline himself. So I feel like it's going to really reward him and stuff because he's
Mm.
been so disciplined. His moon is in Capricorn, you know.
Oh yeah.
You know, I feel like some people can just, depending on like the aspects, Saturn can also mean chronic, but it's also like restriction. So it's like it can, you know, either make someone chronically be really aggressive, or it could also just be like, okay, I'm going to correct that aggressive behavior because and I would say that people who have a healthier experience with Pisces are going to do that because Pisces is the sign that embodies all of the signs. So if you have a good Pisces, if you're co-rulers of Jupiter, Neptune, you're well aspected, I feel like they're going to take that wisdom and they can lead by example and be successful and, you know, have that positive manifestation of it. So I can see, like, I'm just thinking of like a bunch of different charts right now, and I'm just like, oh, some people now that you thought that, I was like, oh, there's certain people I'm going to want to spend a little, I don't want to be around too much, you know? And so I do think that it's just, it's so interesting. Like, but
Amazing.
I don't know.
Okay.
What's your take? What are we going to experience?
Well, I think it's going to be like a reset. Some kind of reset is going to be because, 0 degrees air, especially when they meet in February 2026, when they actually conjunct at 0 degrees Aries, like 0 degrees, like a world point. It's like it's like a new start. It's like initiating new things. So I think it's going to be like a reset. I think a global reset is waiting for us on a
Oh,
global level for
definitely.
sure. Personally, I think in everybody's lives, I think we're gonna be, because Neptune, like on the other side, you have Saturn with boundaries, and then Neptune that is dissolving these boundaries. They're like total opposites. They're coming together. So
Yeah.
finding a new way in Aries, like a new pioneering way of having of finding the balance. This is what exactly what we're talking about today. How to find a balance between where's that fine line when we go over and up over.
Yeah.
I hope that this is going to be possible with this. So I'm
Yeah.
very, kind of hopeful about it. Yeah, finding that balance. I think a lot of times historically, when these two planets got together, lots of socialism was up, and there's like lots of sense for other people and for community is going to come up.
Mm-hmm.
Pluto is already in Aquarius, so I think maybe the sense for all of us it's going to be like, I think we're going to have a new view of the world, and what our part in the world is. So I think we're gonna have new rules. I think we're gonna have new boundaries
Oh yeah.
for sure, right? So it's gonna be like new rules, new things coming up. So I don't know. I think it's the beginning of the world, the end of the world as we know it, and the beginning of a new world in
Mhm.
one way. So I'm excited.
Yeah.
I'm
You
really
know,
excited.
it's so funny because you asked me about Saturn and Neptune. I completely forgot about Neptune. It's like invisible
Yeah,
and stuff. But yeah, I totally agree. And when we had the grand conjunction, and I was thinking too, I was like, man, this is going to be such a catalyst. And I
yeah,
feel like there's going to be correction, community. And I made a video about this in my YouTube channel where, like, you know, like I can sit here and try to make predictions. At the end of the day, what's going to happen is going to happen, you know? So
yeah,
I would rather focus on like, what is the best way for us to like individually and collectively use this energy. So my thing was, I wanted there to be protection, correction for vulnerable people, you know,
yeah,
Saturn, you know, like restructuring stuff for vulnerable people, Pisces, Neptune, and also things that made me think of like society and structure and finances, because Neptune is a higher octave of Venus, you know, so looking at financial fluctuations. And, you know, now there's so much more stuff going on with like AI and universal base income and, you
yeah.
know, things like that, where like people, there's going to be some shift. Like, I'm really looking forward to that.
Yeah, yeah, and not everything's gonna be roses, but it's gonna
No,
be. I think it's gonna be necessary kind of recharge of everything.
growing pains. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, okay. Let's end at this note. I think this was beautiful. Thank you so much. Final words before we close this topic.
I think we did a pretty good job
Yeah,
with
yeah,
everything.
yeah.
So
So to summarize, kind of what people who have issues with setting boundaries, or people who feel they're people pleasers, number one advice would be just to get a good astrology reading to understand your chart. I know it sounds very cliched, very, but I think I think it's a really good first step towards learning how to do that. I know
absolutely.
I'm promoting astrology, but it's true. Like it really helps
Yeah.
with many, many different things in general. So
I would say, especially for something like this, because boundaries, it's emotional, it's watery and stuff, so it's inherently confusing. And
yeah,
the way boundary setting is set up, like, you know, I mentioned in the beginning of this video, I feel like it's good in theory, but it's not good in application. Like, learning the most sustainable way for you is going to be determined through your chart. And
yes,
it's just, and it's like, it helps you and other people as well. So it's such a beautiful catalyst. Like,
yeah.
we're genuinely not just saying this because we're astrologers and yes, we're trying to promote, and, you know, we want to be
I
able to,
mean,
like, you know, it's
yeah,
a thing, but it's legitimately, particularly like, most people have struggled with boundaries. Like, this is probably a lifetime struggle for you. So you probably tried tools and they probably didn't work, and you probably noticed a pattern. So that's a good indicator that, particularly for you, you should get a reading. Like, if you're someone who struggled with boundaries and you got it right the first time, that's great. If you want to get a reading, I'm happy to provide you with one, but you
yeah.
probably have kind of figured it out yourself already. But for people who have struggled, it's so insightful.
I can definitely resonate with that. Your natal chart is just like a fingerprint, right? So it's unique to you. It's like a DNA code. It's unique to you. So, just like when you go to the doctors, that's what I don't like with Western doctors and whatever. It's just, they look at this problem and that's it. It's just part of your body, of
Standardized.
who you are, right? It's not. So
Yeah.
you have to the whole approach. It's so the same thing is with this. Um, I do like to promote astrology, and you just said we don't want to promote. Yes, we do want to promote astrology, and I want to promote astrology because I think it's important, and I feel that
Mhm.
people, the more people know their charts and understand themselves through a lens of astrology, the better the world is going to be where we live. So yes, I'm going to promote it. Yes, I will encourage everybody. It doesn't have to be me or you, whoever you resonate with.
Yes.
That's why I like to, introduce as many astrologers as possible on my
Mhm.
platform, so people can choose the one they relate to. That doesn't have to be me, because I think it's important I think the world is going to be a better place when people uh, will know astrology.
Yeah, well,
That's
that's what I love
yeah,
about astrology is that it's not as like competitive like in corporate worlds because we all have our unique gifts, you know? So I feel
yeah,
comfortable promoting other astrologers and promoting myself, and it's
absolutely.
not a competition. Like we
It's
all
not.
have something unique to offer.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, thank you much. Thank you very much,
Of
Jamie.
course.
Before we leave, please just tell where can people find you. What is your website again, so they can remember and write it down.
So I can put a link underneath for
Okay.
the website. As far as on Instagram, you can also find me under your
Mhm.
profile, Jasmina, as one of the followers. But I'm under Jamie J underscore ME Scorpio AF.
Mhm.
And I also have a YouTube channel with the same name. And I do recommend that you guys check that out because I do have specific videos where I talk about the best way for you to practice boundaries and the best way for you to process traumas
Excellent.
based on the sign that you have. So it's
Excellent.
all
I'm
free. You
gonna
get lots of details.
Yeah, I'm gonna put all your BI information in the description below. Thank you very much. I think this was very useful. I wish you all the best, and we will chat soon again.
Yes. Thanks so much.